Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 2050. Whoo, getting up there in numbers. Census secrets. What you're missing in the fine print? Yes. What secrets do the census reports hold? Now, most countries do census like once every 10 years. In the United States, it's on the years that end in a 0, and they are released every 72 years after they were done. So back in 2022, they released the 1950 census, and there's some great questions on there. Now, you will notice when you go through some of these census reports that some parts have been redacted. That is because those people are still living. So just keep an eye out for those. I don't know when they go back in and unredact them, but they will at some point, I guess. I just don't know when the update is. Also, too, there are some states that I don't know if they still do, but they used to, like California, Kansas, and New York, the ones that I know of, would do a census on the years ending in 5. In the UK, they do their census on the years ending in 1, and they just released the 1921 census. So they do it, like they just released it this year. So they do it every 104 years. So it depends. But those are the two main ones that we're going to be talking about tonight. Other countries have their own when they do their census reports and what's in them and things like that. I will have to say the 2020 census, I was looking forward to filling that out. And I will tell you this, compared to other years that I have seen and the questions that they have asked, the one in 2020, I was not impressed with. From a genealogical perspective, I was not impressed. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see what the future generations think of that one in 2072 when it comes out. They're gonna look at this and go, "What?" Yeah, I tell you. Anyway, so what? So what is a Let's go back. Let's go. Hang on, my notes. No, that's not what I want. I want up here. Too many notes, I tell you. I got notes up the wazoo. If it was written, there'd be stacks of them. So in the things like the 1880 U.S. Census, a farmer in Pennsylvania listed his horse as a family member and gave it the occupation of plow horse. Officials didn't catch it, and it became part of the official record. So you're going to find little quirky things like this on some census reports, depending how aware the enumerators were when they were taking down the details and everything else. But census reports are more than just names and dates. They provide a snapshot of daily life, relationships, and unexpected details. Up until, I think it was 1860 or 1870 was the first time in the US that they actually put how the people in the household are related. But you also have to remember that when they put the relation, they could be the man was the head of the house, and then he had his wife, and then there'll be like a list of children underneath. But here's one thing you have to take into account as well. It assumes that the children listed are also the children of the wife. We know for definite that they're children of the head of the house, because he is the head of the house and is the relationship to him. The children could actually be stepchildren to the wife, or they could be her children naturally. So you have to be aware of that, because it does play a part in the role as well, especially if you're looking through details and stuff. And a good way of figuring this out is looking at the ages. Sometimes when if their wife died young and they remarried, and you've now got the new wife's name there, sometimes she could be a lot younger, and you're looking at it and going, hang on, she's this age. She's only 10 years older than the oldest child. What's going on here? Take that as a clue that she may be a second wife. So look for little details like that. And you can find, excuse me. You can find all sorts of things. And they use the census to also do like surveys as well. You may not have realized, but you're being, a census really is a survey, but it's a snapshot in your life. We're going to look at some of the things that you may find in there. And here's a fun fact for you. In the 1940 US Census, it included a question asking if people had a radio in their home, because radio ownership reflected social and economic status. See, yes. And was it the 1910 census? They would ask, and this will be a big clue for you if you want to know if it's the first wife or the second wife. The US Census in 1910 asked women if they had been pregnant, how many pregnancies they had had, and how many children from their pregnancies were still alive. So it's how many times you've been pregnant and how many children are still living. That was a good indicator. If you had somebody who only had one pregnancy and one child, and she's got four children listed under her name, it's a very good clue that they may not be hers. So census records help us understand who lived together, who moved in and out, and how families evolved over time. In some cases, families stayed in the house for year after year, census after census after census, and in some places that they moved. In the 1900 census, if a woman had multiple children listed, but only one was living, it was hints at past losses and the challenges of the time. Clues from unusual household members will be things like elderly parents living with a couple, possibly a clue for a maiden name. If you see a border with a list with the same last name, it was likely an extended family member on either the wife's side or the husband's side, based on, if the same surname as the husband, it would be on the husband's side. Sorry, just clicked in my head. So how census data reveals economic and social status. They had property ownership. Were they owning it or renting it? Owning a home suggested financial stability. Literacy status. Some census asked people if they could read and write, hinting at education levels. Some of the census even asked what was the highest level of education that they had. Was that in the US or in England? I know I saw that one on an English one at one time. Occupation and employment history. Some jobs were seasonal, explaining why ancestors may have moved. For example, a fisherman in Massachusetts appearing on one census but not the next might indicate a seasonal migration for work. And then we have special census categories and what they can tell us as well. We have the slave schedules from 1850 to 1860 on the US Census, and they provide information of enslaved people even if they weren't named. It would have the name of the owner, and then it would have how many slaves they had and would have them in age, whether they were male or female, and what age group they were in, if they were children, if they were adults. And if I remember correctly, up the top it would have the age group. Let's see, the Veterans Census in 1890 listed Civil War veterans and their widows. So that was a good one for wanting to find out if somebody had passed and you couldn't find their death record. Just have a look on the Veterans Census. The Agricultural Census from the US from 1850 to 1880 recorded farmers' land ownership, crops grown, and livestock showing family wealth. If an ancestor is missing in one census, check if they appear in a different town or state under a different spelling. How occupation, household size, and neighbors provide extra clues. Oh, I love this. This is one of the ones that I love. Clues hidden in occupation. Census records list jobs, sometimes in unexpected ways. A woman in the 1920 census listed as a domestic engineer, a fancy way of saying housewife. I love it. Domestic engineer. I love that. Some occupations hint at immigration status or cultural traditions. Many Italian immigrants were stonecutters, reflecting their old world skills. Also, too, on the thinking of the immigration one reminds me as well, which I don't think I put in here. If I did, we're going to repeat it. If I didn't, you're hearing it now. And which one was it? Trying to remember. I think it was like 1910 or 1920. There was a question asked on the U.S. Census. If they were a U.S. citizen, and if they were not, when did they arrive in the country? I would ask the year of immigration if they were not a U.S. citizen. And if they were born if they were foreign born, so born outside of the U.S., because they started asking, where were you born? Where was your mother born? Where was your father born? So that gave you some information as well. It could help you determine too if you were on the right track of the right person, especially if you had somebody who had a common name. And one of the US census, I want to say it was 1910, 1920, maybe even 1930. On one of those ones, it asked for those that were born outside of the US, it asked when they arrived in the US and whether or not they were naturalized. Where are we up to? So yeah, that one reminded me of the immigration status. Watch for unusual job descriptions. A 1900 census listed a man's occupation as a rat catcher in New York. Must have been a lot of rats around there to have that job. How household size and structures tell a story. A sudden increase in household members could indicate extended families moving in due to economic hardships, a widow taking in boarders to make ends meet. There could have also been not just the economic hardship, but there could also have been a natural disaster where people had moved from the area where the earthquake, the tornadoes, the hurricanes, the tsunamis, whatever it was, and they moved with extended family while they sorted out what was going on back home. A change in last name within a household might hint at blended families, stepchildren listed with different last names, surname changes due to adoption or remarriage. Sometimes in the census, it will still have, like if you've got blended families, you've got his family and her family, you'll have the husband and the wife, then you'll have his children listed and then her children listed. And in the relationship to the head, it will say stepson or stepdaughter. So that will be in there as well. The importance of checking the neighbors. Families often lived near relatives, even if they had different last names. In Irish immigrant communities, whole streets were made up of relatives. You always check the area. I had a case where I had a client who had a rumor in her family that the grandmother her great grandmother had purchased a whole street. So just the street in one block. She had purchased all the houses. Like she lived in this one on the corner. Then every house in that block on that street belonged to her as well. And she rented it to her children. And then when she passed, the house was then deeded to them upon her death. And we found that street in the census report, and we could go down, and I was like, well, hang on, this one's a different name. It must have been a daughter. So we now knew what the daughter's married name was and things like that. So we were able to find, because of this one street, we were able to find all of these relatives that she didn't know she had, because this woman had purchased that entire block of that street. So that was kind of cool to find that. But also look to, and you can do, especially if you're an Ancestry, there's a button that you can go and click and it says view neighbors. And so you can view all the neighbors on that page, then go to the page before and the page after to have a look and see, pull up a map of that area at the time. And you can then see where the houses were located, where people were located with, because it would also show the route that the enumerator took as well. Some of them would go like around this street, down this street, turn there, and then come back up the other side. They may have been crisscrossing the street. Usually they went in a pattern. There was a pattern that they had to go in. And there's actually enumerator books for each census, telling them how to take what each column means on the census report, and the way and the questions they were to ask, and the route that they were to take, whether they were to go around a block and then move to the next block and go around that. So look for those sorts of things. So this is why it's important to check on neighbors. The other thing you can look at when you're looking at other neighbors is look at the occupations. It can also hint that why an ancestor lived in a certain area. Like if there was a factory or a mill of some sort in that area that basically employed, if there was a big business in that area, like a factory or a mill that employed locals, they may have lived in that same area within walking distance of the factory or the mill. So they didn't have to walk too far. And you may find all of these people that are living in this community, somebody in the house, or maybe one or two people within the house have a similar occupation, because there was a business nearby that employed the local people. If you can't find an ancestor, try searching for sibling or cousins who lived nearby. I always tell you, if you're trying to go up your tree and just do the direct ancestors, you got to include the siblings and the cousins. You have to include those, because sometimes there may be a piece of information that's missing from your direct line. And the only way you're going to find it is go check out the siblings and the cousins and see what's in there. There's been some strange and funny things found on historical census records. Pets and animals have been listed as family members. There was the one we mentioned earlier about the plow horse entry in the 1880 census, where a farmer listed his horse as a household member with an occupation. A parrot with a name in the 1910 census, a U.S. census. Someone in New York included their parrot Polly in the census. I'm kind of wondering, where were people's heads at when they were explaining, well, there's also Polly, and I wonder what they'd put for if they were a son or a daughter. Or some unusual occupations or titles you may come across. There was keeping house in the 1800s. It was a polite term for housewife or homemaker. You actually had idiot and lunatic on the 1850 to the 1900 census, offensive by modern standards, but these were terms that were used for disabilities back during that time. So you also have to remember that when you're looking at these reports too, you have to look at the time period that they were in and put them into context. Gentleman or lady on the UK census in the 1800s, a title often used for those wealthy enough not to work. Yes, so you could find those people as well. I've come across some of those when I've been looking for ancestors on the UK census. The most unique census entries ever recorded, a US census taker who counted himself twice on the 1900 census. A man listed himself in 2 different states because he worked in both. Now I got to tell you a story about the 2020 census. At the time, I was living in an RV. At the time the census was taken, where was I? I was in Florida when the census was taken, and I was in several groups for RVing, and they would discuss. There was huge arguments going on about what they put on the census. Do they put where their home state is? Do they put where they are right now? And it is where you are on the date that the census takes place. And I think it was 1st of April we had to do that one. So they wanted to know, where were you on the 1st of April? If you were in Florida, you put down Florida. You don't put your home state down because you were not there. And so this was a huge argument, and going backwards and forwards. And they says, well, I'm putting down Florida because Florida needs more money for the resorts and blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm putting down this place over here because that state needs more government assistance for the elderly people in that one. And people were arguing about why they were putting down different areas and things. Well, I'm putting down my home state, but because that's where I mainly live. They totally missed the whole thing of taking a census report. Was like, it is, where are you on the 1st of April, 2020? Where were you? You can't put home if you weren't there. If you were in Florida, you put down you were in Florida. It's as simple as that. It is, yeah. So that's another reason. That's another thing too when you're looking at census, is where were you on the date of the census? And you can easily find out what dates the census were taken. And like there's one with my 4th great grandfather in there, that his wife is the head of the house, and she lists that she's married to a jeweler, and then her son's listed, who's my 3rd great grandfather. But I couldn't find him on the census report. He may have been in the middle of the ocean on a ship, either on his way to the east or on his way back from the east with new stones for making the jewelry and things like that, because he used to go on these runs to get gems. So he may have been on his way to the east to buy some gems, or on his way back from the east with gems coming home. I don't know where he is. I can't find him. He's one of those. He's one of those popular 5 first names. He was a William. His dad was, my 4th great grandfather was a William. His son was a William as well. Yes. So, a man faked his age on the 1910 census. A man in Texas claimed to be 120 years old. No proof, but officials recorded it. I guess, yeah. In those days, you can look up stuff on computers, I guess. In 1850, one census taker listed his own dog as a family member to see if anyone would notice. When you've been researching your census reports for your ancestors, what are the weirdest things you have found in a census report? So share it with us in the comments. Oh, and my question for you today, actually, is 2 questions. Have you ever discovered something unusual or surprising in a census report? Maybe a long-lost relative, a strange occupation, or even a household pet listed as a family member. So if you can't find birth records for the youngest in the house, maybe they're actually a cat or a dog or a parrot. You never know. Census records are more than just names. They tell stories about where our ancestors lived, what they did, and even what odd quirks made it on the official records. And every census tells a story. It's just a matter of reading between the lines. Whether your ancestors were horse farmers, bootleggers, or census pranksters, these records help bring family history to life. So you have to remember that. And I do have a challenge for you. Pull up an old census record for an ancestor and look beyond the basics. Check the occupation, check the neighbors, look at the household structure. What surprises you about it? And if you look down on the US Census, if you look down the side, there's actually a column there where they write in the street name, and then there's another column that they write in the number that they were on that street. And then there's another column where they put another number, and that other number is the number that the number of households that the census had visited. So every time the enumerator visited, and it's in the order that the enumerator visited the house. So if it has like 342, they were the 342nd house that this person had called upon. So look for things like that as well. So yeah, that's your challenge for the day. Go see what you can find on an ancestor. Instead of just looking at names and ages, there's also on there, there'll be, let's see, names, ages, how they're, who they are in the house, and how they're related to the head of the house. So who's the head of the house and how they're related to that. Their marital status is in there. In one census, what one was it? On one census, they asked the month in which they were born and the year in which they were born. It's right there on a census report. And in some cases, the enumerator wrote down the date and month in the month column, and then the year in the year column. Another census asked how long people have been married or the year in which they got married. So that will be another clue too, if they've only been married 6 years and there's 10 kids listed and half of them are over the age of 6. So then you got to look to see, were they her children, his children? Was he married before? That sort of stuff as well. So another clue that there may be a second wife involved. So yes, you had the marital status there as well. And then you had things like where they were born, basically what state they were born in or country if they weren't born in the US, and then where their parents were born, mother or father, where they were born. What else was on there? Yeah, one census asked how many hours they had worked that week. So they were keeping tally of how many hours did you work this week. Did you own the home or rent the home? Let's see what else was on there. If you were a farmer, they would ask, how many acres do you have? And even some of the people listed on the in the census report in that household could be farm workers that work on that farm. And some of them are their own sons that work on the farm, and then they may have had some boarders or lodgers or stuff like that. You may find your ancestor as being a servant in a household. That was another indicator on the wealth and social status. I've come across some which could be my ancestor, but I'm not 100% sure because they were missing from their family's one. So where were they? And I found them on this one that was in a household, and they were a domestic servant. And so I'm like, is that the one I'm looking for? Because there's a lot of people that have the name Mary with that surname. So be cautious of that. Be very cautious. I have been going through my tree this week, trying to do some DNA matches. And the number of times I have come across other trees that I go and have a look at, I don't incorporate them into I just go and see what sources have they been using, where I have found that they may have a census report there. So I go, which census are they on? And, who's in the household at that time? And I go and I have a look at the census, and it's a completely different person. Like, I know it's a completely different person because I've already proven who the parents are of this person. And when you look at the census report, the parents are completely different. They're not even aunts or uncles. It's got this person listed as a daughter or a son. And I'm like, well, that's the wrong household for a start. So be cautious of that. If you find somebody that has the same name as your ancestor, is that the right census report? Do you have the parents that you could use to confirm that? Have a look at the census report. Does it list them as a daughter or a niece or a nephew or an aunt or an uncle and things like that in there as well? So you've got to be aware of things. Make sure you know what you're looking for. If you're not sure, put up a spreadsheet. Create a spreadsheet that has the name at the top and then has the year of birth, the approximate year of birth in some cases, their age, the approximate year of birth, where they were born, any of the details enlisted all down there that pertain to that person. Are they, and how they list, and who are the parents that are listed, who's the head of the household, who's the wife, and just capture all those details. Then take the next person and write all those details down too. Also write the siblings down, because you may know who the siblings are, but there are families out there, because they use family names, John, James, George, William, and Thomas, the most common ones. Then you may find them listed in the children. It's sort of like, oh, well, that's what I've got listed as her siblings, but that list is pretty much the same as well. and the ages are within 2 to 3 years of each other. They could be cousins. Something as simple as that. They could be cousins, or look, where's the, oh, and you also got to put there too, where is the census being held? You got to put down the district in which they're researching at the time, because it could be, this is at one end of the country, this is on one side of the West Coast, this is on the East Coast. East Coast it is, or maybe the families moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. And so you got to be aware of these things. Take note of the details. One of my favorite books is reading is Lee Child's Reacher series. And his main character in there, Jack Reacher, he's very, and if you've seen the Reacher series on TV too, it's repeated time and time, and the details matter. Details are important. When you're researching genealogy, details matter. And it means even going down to who are the siblings and this. One of the things I'm doing right now on my tree is I'm cleaning it up a little bit. And there's some tools that Ancestry have in there, the Pro Tools, and one of them is going through your tree looking for possible duplicates, looking for people that have no documentation. So they could just be there listed, and they may have come in from another tree. So you might have the reference to that tree in there, but they don't have any documentation like birth certificates, death certificates, marriage, census reports. They don't have any of that detail in there. And so it lets you know these people have no documents. They're no documents. This one here has got on there that the mother was only 10 years old when the child was born. And it tells you details like this. So I've just been going through doing the duplicates and looking at them. And it's interesting how in one household they had a Mary and a Martha, and they thought that, and they were born within 2 years of each other, and they thought they were the same. They're actually siblings. So you got to, details matter. Everything is in the details. Look at the details. When you are comparing people, you have to be super, super careful about that, because once you do a merge, you can't undo the merge. You've then got to go and recreate the person on the other family tree and put them in where they're supposed to be. So yeah, it's going through that. And I had one where we had the two first names that were the same. The year of birth was in a year or two of each other. The same last name. Then you get down to the parents. One had the parents listed, one didn't. One had siblings, and so they put them in two columns side by side. So here's the parents listed, here's the siblings listed. No siblings for this one. Here's the husband and the children for this one. No husband and children for this one. Are they the same person? So then I had to go and research more to find out, are they the same person? And then came up with the conclusion that yes, those ones were actually the same person. And I actually had documentation on birth records to back up the date of birth. So, and the other one I suspected came off had a census report against it. And when I went in and had a look and went, oh, well, somebody didn't do a very good job of this one. And then I was able to merge those two. But it was taking note of the details. You don't just go and look, oh, yeah, they're the same name, same year born. Yeah, let's do. No. Are the parents the same? Are the spouses the same? Are the children the same? Do they have the same siblings? Yeah. And a lot of the duplicates are like very similar names and they're born within a couple of years of each other, like Mary and Martha. And people think, oh, Mary and Martha go together. Yep. But they're obviously a duplicate. And you go and they go, not a duplicate, because they're actually siblings. So attention to detail. And with that, we are out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening. And we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. Yes, tomorrow evening, 6 p.m. Pacific. Hey, konera.